This episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast is brought to you by BetUS.
Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, a returning guest. Very happy to join us. I hope, although I'll find out soon enough, that he is enjoying some semblance of a summer vacation after what was, his busiest time of year. Needs no introduction, of course. ESPN's Bobby Marks. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Well, it's funny. You know, having lived in Florida for the last 8 years, we're on this different time schedule than we would be if we're living in northern New Jersey or New York, where for me, my 15-year-old goes back to school on next week, and my 18-year-old, we move out to college in a week and a half. So that August break that we usually would have really does not exist and everything. So it's all good. It's all good. Life in the NBA has kind of slowed down a little bit though. So I guess we're dealing with like kind of real world issues right now.
Yeah, and thankfully, sports are still an escape from all the real world stuff, so we don't have to get too much into that. Well, before I actually get into any of the Knicks stuff, how was Sports Business Classroom in Vegas?
It was awesome. It was awesome. It exceeded my expectations. Just because I really had no idea what I was walking into when they asked me to come a year ago to come, run it. We had 138 students.
Wow.
We had a media broadcast wing, which I think can grow from this and then add. And then, certainly salary cap, analytics, scouting. We had a lot of students. And it wasn't just, the 20-year-old in college. We had a lot of people who were trying to figure out, who had maybe worked as a prosecutor in Dallas, was like, okay,
sure,
This is something for me that I want to do. We had a big agent group, which was, we had about 30 to 34, 35 people that had already taken the agent exam. But I'm telling you, it was one of the most gratifying weeks I've had. It was a lot we put into him, Eric Pincus and I. But it was one of the more gratifying weeks just to kind of, you get to this stage where you're kind of giving back a little bit and try to give expertise as far as, how to break into sports, which is really hard. CP came out and, helped us with building the brand. As far as, and that's the thing, like, certainly what you were doing at Knicks Film School, like I always tell people, like the odds of you working in a front office is like, let's be fair, right? Yeah. Like it's hard. Like it's not like, it's not like me in 1995 breaking in and we had 8 people in the Nets front office and I got to stick around for 6 months and then Willis eventually hired me because I wouldn't leave and I just worked my way. Like that path doesn't exist anymore. So the theme for me was like kind of build your brand, right? Like if you want to get into sports and if you want to, whether it be a second job or if this is your first job, like how do you break into sports without working for a front office? Like that was the biggest theme for me, that we've tried to teach the students and everything. And hopefully we exceeded here, but no, it was a terrific, I'm looking forward to it. The wheels are spinning already for next year. And now I'm working on the CBA 101 that we had out last year. I've updated it, that we'll put out online sometime in September. But it was really a terrific week.
People ask me all the time about how started at Knicks Film School and any advice. And I'm like, just meet as many people as you can. Yeah. And I don't think that there's any place at any time where you can meet more people and more of the right people than going to Vegas for Summer League. And you're just not going to do any better than Sports Business Classroom. So for anybody out there listening who is planning ahead for next summer, think ahead and make sure you're there when Bobby does this again a year from now. The reason why people want to get into sports is because it is a lot of fun, even though it is a lot of work. And this summer, I think, was very interesting, I think, from my perspective, because it was really our first go around with the governor off, right? With the CBA now, or the new CBA.
Yeah.
And it was definitely some adjustments. And I think you could look at anything that either the Knicks did or that happened to the Knicks in the case of Isaiah Hartenstein and connect it at least tangentially to how the rules have changed a little bit. I'm just going to start here because there were 3 big things the Knicks did. Well, 4 if you count the OG Anunoby extension, but I think we all expected that. 3 big things. So between Mikal Bridges getting traded to the Knicks, Jalen Brunson signing the extension that he did, and Isaiah Hartenstein signing for essentially $30 million annually with a team option, but still. What shocked you the most, or did none of them shock you? I guess I should give you that as an option.
I would say probably the Mikal Bridges trade with New York and Brooklyn. Really not as much Bridges getting traded to New York, but Brooklyn engaging, both sides engaging as far as in a blockbuster type trade, just because we had never. I worked for the Nets for 20 years. I would call over to New York just to check in and see how people. I had friends there who worked in their front office. Jamie Matthews, who still works there, I consider a good friend. I would just call him to check in and see how his kids were doing, right? We would never talk trades or shop or anything like that. I've said it all along, like I never remember even calling over there to offer something, to make a trade proposal back in the 90s or the 2000s, just because, it just wasn't like, there wasn't like, we're kind of at two different paths and stuff as far as how teams were building their roster. But that probably shocked me the most, I would say, just because as far as, we all knew what New York had been sitting on as far as from draft pick equity, right, waiting for that next big superstar to become available, which I think a lot of people are still waiting for that to happen. Across the league, there hasn't been one that's been available this offseason, so you could be waiting for a long time. I think certainly that what you read, from Brooklyn all along was that, that Bridges was going to be the guy that they were going to build around. Certainly he had 2 years left. He wasn't going into the last year of his contract. I think certainly when they're able to regain their own draft picks from Houston, that really, listen, I don't think this deal happens without Brooklyn regaining their own draft picks, which was 2025, and then they eliminated the swap in 26, because that kind of gives them a clear path just to bottom, right? Like that gives them a reason why to hit the bottom. And if you're going to hit the bottom, then you might as well move off Mikal Bridges and look to build out more of what your draft equity here. So that would probably be, if Mikal Bridges was on, I don't know, Phoenix, another team, I would be like, oh wow, but I think that one, just because I was eating a dinner by myself in Brooklyn because it was the night before the draft, and it caught me by surprise. I was like, oh boy, so you kind of get a little bit of an inclination here, but I think that for me would certainly be the biggest one.
One thing, I don't want to spend too much time on past stuff because you wrote a wonderful article looking forward to a potential Julius Randle extension. I want to get to that soon, but I do have to ask, because I've wondered it. I've said a couple times, and you just kind of mentioned it, Knicks got tired of waiting. How much do you think they were looking ahead to the fact that swinging the big trade could have potentially gotten more difficult with that many more hoops to jump through because of all the apron stuff? Do you think that factored in here?
Yeah, I think certainly salaries were eventually going to start increasing here. Yeah. I think New York has done a terrific job balancing their books, right? Like as far as how whether they've structured it. You certainly had a Jalen extension looming, right? Whether it be this year or whether they're going to be the full, whatever that 269 number in 2025. OG had not been signed yet. Randle is still kind of we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with Julius here. I think you did see it kind of as a window here to kind of maximize as far as with the apron rules to try to before. I think that what the apron rules do is they allow you, if you're just there, if you're kind of hanging around, whether it be the first or second apron, it gives you the flexibility to do these type of deals. But if you're like Phoenix and you're like 40 million in, right? Like you're in, right? You're done. This is what you are. Kind of Milwaukee and Boston are kind of where New York potentially could have been, I think, hanging around 8 or 9 million over the second apron here. So I think for New York, it would have been very easy just to roll back the group, right? Like it would have been very easy. You lose to Indiana in the second round. You can blame injuries.
Half
certainly
your team's out.
Yeah, I think if you're healthy, I think they would have made it to a conference finals. I don't think they would have probably beaten the version that we saw of Boston. I think that Boston team was really, really good. And I think you're thinking, okay, here's our window. If we're going to go all in, whether it be 4 or 5 first round picks, is it for a guy like Mikal Bridges? Because the beauty of the Bridges contract is it's not like you're acquiring a guy that's making 40 to $40 to $50 million and everything.
It's not the Towns contract or something like that.
Yeah, because that basically that depletes 2 or 3 players that eventually coming out.
Real quick on Hartenstein, and then we'll kind of start to look forward. I mean, we were on here in February before the deadline, and we were it was more like, would the Knicks have to go to the full early bird number as opposed to the reality that ended up unfolding? Obviously, Isaiah, because of the injuries, Isaiah had to play a bigger role on the team, and he was given probably some more responsibility over those last 3-4 months. I am wondering, though, how much of that contract do you think, from Oklahoma City's perspective, again, kind of turning to the CBA, not that they don't love Isaiah Hartenstein, obviously they love him because they paid him all this money, but this was kind of their last summer to make this sort of signing. And I wonder if for the Knicks, it was just kind of like wrong place, wrong time, and you had this team out there. Does that kind of how you see it also?
Perfect. Like, I think we wrote about when Oklahoma City lost to Dallas, like this was kind of their window to maximize financially, right? Like they never, if you study how teams are built, Oklahoma City does not go out and sign free agents. Like, they don't go out and spend. It's the draft and it's free agency. But they were eventually going to have a decision with Josh Giddey, who they wound up moving to Chicago for Alex Caruso. And then all of a sudden, next offseason, which is the offseason 25, you had Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren eligible for rookie extensions, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Supermax eligible. Like, all of a sudden, like, this fun, adorable team that was built through the draft, it's coming here. So you had this financial window to maximize, whether it be this offseason or next offseason here. And then you combine that with early bird rights in New York with Isaiah. It's kind of the perfect storm. So who's the guy that we can go out and spend? We can overpay. I mean, let's face it's an overpay, but also fit within our window here. There's a team option in the 3rd year. He can come off the bench for you. We've seen him do it in New York when he first got there. You can play him with Holmgren if you want to. He knows kind of what his role is going to be. And I think it was kind of like the perfect storm as far as, from the Knicks perspective here. Like, if Oklahoma City was out of the mix, like we just eliminate them, like let's say they were a cap space team, I don't know if there was a team like Orlando that would have come in, and Utah.
That was the only other one that I.
Yeah, and they were pretty active right in Orlando, building rosters. They did similar to what Oklahoma City did. They took advantage of Tavius Cole-Pope, a little bit different. Denver could have brought him back if they wanted to. And then they brought their own guys back, right? Like, they brought back Mo Wagner and Gary Harris and Jonathan Isaac got renegotiated here. Yeah. So they were able to kind of go through that process here. So I get it. I mean, I think everyone in New York is probably an expert on early bird rights, and they're probably like, why is there even a rule? I think the funniest thing for me is people are like, well, why is there a rule? And I'm like, I don't know. It's been there before. It's always been a rule. Like, that's just how the rule is.
Yeah, no, it actually caused me to go do some research back in the 80s when they were kicking around, like basically when David Stern was kind of figuring out the whole CBA thing initially, and that uncovered some fun stuff. Quick break to tell you about our new friends from BetUS. Are you looking for a new book this basketball season? BetUS is the answer. They have the fastest payouts in the industry. 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000, 200% crypto deposit bonus, fast and easy deposit and withdrawal process. Check out my BetUS link in the description below. 24/7 personalized service, 365 days a year, live wagering on all major games, best betting variety in the business. Get 10% back on your net losses twice a year. And did you know that BetUS can give you your very own personal account manager? Hey, Andrew.
Hey, John.
What do you think about going through an NBA award and making a pick, me and you?
Let's do it. How about MVP?
I like MVP, especially because Jalen Brunson is definitely going to win it, if only. So looking at the odds that I am seeing in front of us, I got to tell you, I feel a little bit like I'm betraying Knicks fans everywhere, but I kind of like Anthony Edwards at plus 1,200 because I think the Timberwolves could do very well in the West, and I think he has another little bit of a leap left in him.
It's cheating to say that Giannis at plus 700 is a great bet. It's a former 2-time MVP that is giving you 7-1 odds. So I like that bet. We slander his name, but Joel Embiid at 7-1 is good money. I do like your call at plus 1,200 for Anthony Edwards. Our beloved Jalen Brunson has the same as Jason Tatum at plus 2,000. I think that's, if this was a first team All NBA odds, I'd like both. I unfortunately have to pass on both. The one I'm interested in, John, as far as a money value, we've talked about this a lot on our Patreon pod lately, but Victor Wembanyama is plus 2,000. And I do think one day he's going to win not one, not two, not three, but multiple MVPs in this league. And if you're thinking the clock starts sooner rather than later, maybe a breakout Wemby second season that gives you, I mean, look, parlay this with, we'll go over most improved player odds in the future, but plus 2,000 is just a good value play. And who knows, maybe the Spurs are like the 3 seed with, 40 games left, and suddenly his odds are much better and you can recalculate. But yeah, Wemby at plus 2,000, then I do like your Anthony Edwards plus 1,200 bet.
And of course, no bet on any Knick is a bad bet, if only for morale. So Jalen Brunson staring right there for you. Thank you, Andrew, for your thoughts on that. One more time, use the link in the description and get 125% deposit bonus up to $2,000 for your first 3 deposits. All right, I want to make sure we get to Julius, and then if we have time later, there's a couple of little things I'll head on. You wrote a wonderful piece with Tim Bontemps a week or two ago about how the Jalen Brunson extension impacts not only the Knicks moving forward in the Randle situation, but the NBA at large. And you kind of had 2 questions that you asked there. One was, would this be the start of some kind of a trend? Maybe not to this level, but something like that. And then in terms of Randle, and I think you quoted an executive who was like, is Randle going to be Jalen Brunson, or is Randle going to be...
You know what I didn't add in the article, that Randle and Paul George are also represented by the same agent. So that was not mentioned in the article. Aaron Mintz. Yeah.
Not that agency has ever had anything to do with how the Knicks run their team. So let's start with Randle, because look, it's right now, for not this upcoming season, but next season, it's a 30.9 number. If he opts out of that and extends, it's 40.5. Without getting into all the machinations, it's basically the difference between your second apron team. Realistically, doesn't put them over, but realistically, it's a second apron team versus not a second apron team. We should also note that yesterday, and you noted this in the article as well. If anybody hasn't read the article, go read the article. It's excellent. Yesterday was August 6th. For Randle to have extended this summer and not be traded this season, and be traded this season, would have needed to extend by yesterday. So now if he extends, he won't be traded this year.
However, though,
yes,
the rules have changed a little bit as far as extending trades, where there's more flexibility to, let's say New York extends them for 120%, and then they add on 2 more years and stuff. Like there is a window.
There are machinations.
Where like, as long as you don't fully blow out if you sign him for 4 for 181, like he can't get traded. However, like if you extended him for, I'm just throwing out these numbers, like 2 for, I don't know, 75. Let's just throw it out there. Then yes, there is, as long as he fits within he doesn't exceed a certain percentage and amount of years, that he would be able to be traded. Like Larry Markkinen, for example, and I think we're going to hear something soon on him. I'm like checking my phone. I'm reading something. I know. I was reading something while I'm like talking to you, and I apologize. I'm reading
it's totally fine.
Like he renegotiates and then extends. He's off the board. He can't be traded for 6 months. So yes, for Randle's perspective, there is just because he gets extended doesn't mean he can't be traded. I would say this, though. It is extremely rare where a player gets extended right now and then traded, especially at that big of a number. I mean, and how I think what's hard in the regular season, and when you start trading $35-36 million guys to be able to, and under these, it's like, doing the Rubik's Cube, the jigsaw puzzle. You got to work within how many players can you take back in a contract, in a trade. You only have to stay within 15. In the offseason here, we're playing with 21 players, right? You can expand your roster to 21 and you can do whatever you want here. So I would say that, although I wouldn't say never, though, I would say if he is eventually extended here and they've got until June 30th to figure out something here, that I think it would make it a little more difficult to kind of move off him.
And the other part of it is, like, how often do we see a team that is a contending team, which New York certainly hopes to be? Let's say that we're 2 weeks out from the trade deadline and they're whatever they are, 30 and 15. They're really going to upend their team. Like, that's the sort of thing. Maybe it's happened a couple times. It feels like it's extraordinarily rare. So to me, I'm looking at it like they're not that they're. Well, this is what I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Because this is in a front office that has traditionally liked to handle their business ahead of time. They do not like to let things linger. You mentioned Fred VanVleet and Paul George and Isaiah Hartenstein in the article as players who have left at that kind of number. The difference was Hartenstein, they couldn't extend a bit more than that. Paul George, VanVleet, those situations were allowed to let linger, and there are different reasons why it got to the point that it got to. And now here we have the Knicks with Randle. I'm wondering, put yourself in Leon Rose's shoes. How confident are you that you can let this go unresolved into this season? And how much would that, I don't want to say bother you, but you feel like it's hanging over your head, as opposed to the alternative, which we can get to next, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think you almost have to have a drop dead date as far as when you would want to get something done. I mean, how rare it's rare that you are extending at a big number in the middle of the season, right? On December 14th that we read that Julius is extending for 3 for 100, for example, here. That's rare. I think if you're in New York, you look at it in a couple different ways. And we wrote it in the article here, is that where is he health-wise? Right. I think you do want to see him, whether it be summer workouts that are going on, certainly the shoulder, right? A little bit different than getting your ankle scoped the year before. Where is he health wise? I think you're looking at it. Where is the market next year? Because the market is not going to get much better. We're in this weird phase where the market wasn't great this year. We had a 3.5% increase. And we saw it, right? There were 7 teams operating under the cap. We saw signing trades increase. Teams had to get more creative, the apron rules, all these different things here. We're going to get a boost, right? We're going to get a 10% boost as far as with the TV deal. The salary cap's going to go up here. But still, there are going to be more teams operating over the cap. Really, Utah is going to probably come off the board here as a team that has cap space if they renegotiate and extend marketing. You're really looking at Brooklyn as one of the teams that is sitting on all this money. Right? 80 or 90 million. So if you're the Nets, right? So I think you can go 2 different ways. All right, what happens if we get the number 1 pick in the draft and now we can accelerate this thing and we're sitting on $90 million in cap space? Does he fit in, or does some of these other players who will potentially become free agents fit in here? So I think if you're New York, I think where he is health-wise, what the market could look like, and as you said, you really, they like to kind of handle their business out front. Extensions are how teams have retained their players, right? We've seen that the last 2 years. Even back when you mentioned the 3 players with Paul, Fred, and Isaiah is kind of an outlier based on early bird right. And even Fred, Toronto got screwed with Fred because the extension rules weren't as great as they are now. They were limited at how much they can extend Fred for, where basically Fred said, well, let me see what the market is. I'm not going to extend for $23-24 million. Paul is a different, the Clips just basically said, we're not paying you, right? We're not paying you 4 for 220 and stuff like that, and he goes to another team. So Julius is a unique situation just because does it make sense for him to opt in to his contract and then extend off that, similar to what Josh Hart did. Josh was certainly a lot lower of a number. So I do think if we get to October 22nd, which is the first day of the season, and there's no extension in place, then I would say then this thing is probably going to play out, and then we'll see where it is when we get to the offseason, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world where it used to be like, oh my God, a guy's in the last year of his contract. We're going to lose this guy here because there's 20 teams waiting to sign him.
In terms of opting in and extending, I'll give a shout out to Fred Katz of The Athletic real quick. Wrote a nice article a few weeks ago pitching that exact possibility, because at least that accomplishes the main goal of keeps you out of the apron for an additional year. How much is part of the calculation again for New York? I'm unfairly asking you to put yourself in New York shoes, but you get asked this all the time, all the time, so I don't feel too bad. How much of it is, do you think, okay, let's say he opts in and he adds a couple of years or maybe even 3 years onto that number, and it not goes terribly, but maybe he gets another injury, and it's not like we haven't seen some downturns from Julius Randle before. I guess my point is he's not in that echelon of player where it's like it's a no-brainer here. Do you think they're thinking about, how much do you think they're thinking about that, of if we extend him now, well, there's a possibility this may be our team, and if it doesn't go well, then we're kind of done.
I think extending at 4 for 181, yes, like that, and we wrote about it. Like that basically negates what Brunson just did. To be able to go out and keep retain Mikal Bridges, whether it be next offseason when he can sign him to a bigger number. I think it's like 4 for 150 and change. That basically negates it. He would become like the first guy making $40 million, although OG's number eventually gets you over 40. So I think at that number, that's not going to happen. Even with the cap rate rising, it's hard for me to see them extending him for 4 for 181. I think you have to kind of reach a compromise here. Like you kind of have to reach a sweet spot. And then Julius might say, hey, like I extended for 4 for 117. That was the compromise 3 years ago here. But we're living in a different world here. And I tell this to agents all the time, what you think your player is worth, that's great. Like we could do the analytics all we want. You could say your guy's a $16 million player if he's a backup point guard. Like TJ McConnell might think he's a $13, $15 million guy because he had a great year. But the market dictates what you are, right? Like the market dictates as far as what Julius Randle's next contract could be. And outside of Brooklyn, I don't see a great market here. So, but going back to your point, I do think there is value for him just because like you could say, well, we'll put, we don't have Julius and we could put OG at the 4. And then I'm like, well, man, like I'm looking at OG's like durability, it's like you need, but here's what the CBA has done. And unless you really structure your contracts really good, it's like, it's a toy box, right? Instead of having 5 toys and you can play with that recess, now the league is saying you only have 3. Right?
Yeah,
like you can have all these good things, but not great things. Boston can have all these great things, but they're going to pay $500 million to do it. Phoenix can have these great things, and we can question what their roster is going to be. But it will cost them significantly here. And if you want the 5 toys, you better be really happy as far as what your roster is going to be. So I always think that New York wants to, yes, I think you would love to have Randle committed, but I think you also want the flexibility that you have the option to change your roster a little bit. Because you remember, I mean, you know this. I mean, like you don't have your draft equity as far as the ability to trade outside of that Wizards and that Detroit pick. And those are protected. Yeah. And you have your own, but like you can't trade them based on how the rules are here. So be able to retain. That's why your draft picks this past year are important to you. To be able to retain your own players, but also have that flexibility to go out and make a deal where you can maybe move off Julius at $33 million instead of $50 million, as far as in a trade here.
Yeah, it's like hearing you talk about everything you just said. The two situations that come to mind are one, the DeRozan one, which again, it's not apples to apples, but like there's a team that ended up having to do a sign and trade, and they got, I don't want to say they got nothing back, but they got essentially nothing back. Well, that's also because they weren't willing to go into the tax, but we don't have to talk about the Bulls. And then the other one I think about is like Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram's a 25, 26-year-old former All-Star, really, really, really nice player. And there doesn't appear to be a market for him because of what he wants on his next number. And I'm like, again, I'm not comparing Julius Randle to Brandon Ingram, different players, but like, I'm again thinking about it from Julius's perspective. How sure is he that there's going to be some number there? And like you just said, if Brooklyn doesn't offer it, where is it coming from?
Listen, if Leon Rose today on August, I don't even know what date it is.
7th, I think.
7th, goes to Aaron Mintz and says, hey, we're going to offer you we're going to have you decline your option, and we're going to offer you 3 for 100. I would seriously consider taking that.
That's
$100 million guaranteed money. I would seriously consider that. I think that's I think his number where he is, I think he's priced right now at 30.
Interesting.
I think listen, you can play, you can keep on playing it out, and you can opt in and then become a free agent in 2026, but he's going to be 2 years older than what he is right now. I think that's the biggest thing is like, and we had a quote in there from an executive that said like, the money for the players is going to be so great eventually, but the rules are so restrictive that there's got to be some type of compromise, like instead of a guy taking $70 million, maybe it's him taking $60 million and having that flexibility there. And I mean, that's going to be the next thing as far as some of these bigger named guys out there that, who's going to get $85 million a year, and their team might say, hey, could you do 70? And that allows us to do all these different, whether a trade or bring in some free agents here. But I do think if there's an opportunity for Julius to get guaranteed money, and it's not, if you came to him and said, hey, can you do a 2 for 25? Or, it's not like some lowball number, then I think it would make a lot more sense for him to take that guaranteed money, just because I'm looking at what's happened to him the last 2 years here.
Last 2 years has not finished the season healthy. I mean, you could just say it. The cap nerd in me will not forgive myself if I don't ask you this before I let you go. We saw Chua sign for $6 million 1 year using bird rights, and he waived the key was he waived the no trade, which a lot of other players have done this summer. The Knicks still have that $5.168 million.
5.2. Yeah.
5.2, whatever. Taxpayer, mid-level. Yeah. There's no one out there on the market worth paying that.
No.
So I'm wondering, it's a two-part question. One, I've been theorizing that they're just going to sign someone to that to have the quote-unquote human trade exception. Do you agree with that? And two, do you think the league is going to start to have an issue with, like, we saw like KJ Martin. There's been a few other ones you could kind of,
Yeah. Oh, I've already heard it. I've heard it. I've heard the whispers through the league, and I applaud teams, right? If you're going to give us a set of rules that make it very restrictive to conduct business, we're going to use guys. We're going to use KJ Martin and Josh Okogie.
Okogie is,
I mean, I think my friend Brian Windhorst said it on and I think this might have raised a couple eyebrows on 645 Fifth Avenue, where he said, "Hey, don't be surprised if you see Jonas Valanciunas in a Laker uniform, right?" So if you're the league, you're saying, "Well, wait a minute, that the Wizards did a signing trade and they drafted Alex Sarr. Why do they need Jonas Valanciunas? And they had Marvin Bagley and Rashawn Holmes and all this stuff here." So, listen. You can go about and do whatever you want as long as you're not tampering and you're not doing any side agreements, promises here. I don't know I think KJ Martin could play in Philadelphia because they have a lack of size. I think Josh Okogie is a big wing, right? Like they're not like just two guys that are, you're just kind of signing off the street. So, but I do like, I was, I think you could have done that with Tyus Jones and with the Wizards. I think you could have used him as a trade asset if you wanted to, but I think then you're close to the luxury tax and the apron rules and all these other things here. I think if you're seeing teams sign players for the exact same number that another player is being signed for, that might probably, raise the red flag. Listen, if Josh Okogie was signing for $9 million and KJ Martin was signing for $9 million, and both players were going to be, I know the apron rules for Phoenix is certainly you wouldn't be able to do that, but like, I get it. I understand where the league would be coming from, but as I said, they've given teams these rules here. And I think every team, doesn't matter what CBA, you're always looking for a loophole that's not in the CBA that you're going to be able to do. And unless it's a side agreement and you have it in writing and there's a paper trail, then I think you can go about, and do something like that here.
Yeah, I mean, and even to go back to where we started, the Mikal Bridges trade. They used the Shake Milton as a sign and trade to.
Yeah, I mean the rules have changed in the CBA we had this in way back when we traded Jason Kidd in 2008 to Dallas. Where you were allowed to add players if you had their bird rights. It didn't matter if they still if they weren't on your roster to end the season. Like Keith Van Horn hadn't played in the league for like 3 years, but Dallas had his bird rights and they were able to include him in a trade to make the money work. So what the league has done, it's like, we Keith, like we had to convince Keith to do it. We're going to pay you like $5 million. He's like, well, I'm living in Colorado and enjoying life. I'm like, no, you can just come into the practice facility and read a book if you want to. And so that's how that deal, because what happened in that trade was that Jerry Stackhouse had come out and said, well, if I'm getting traded to New Jersey, I'm just going to get waived and I'm going to resign with Dallas, because back then they had those rules where you were allowed to do that, right? You can get waived and then resign with your former team. And the league was like, well, that part of the deal is not going to happen. So now Keith gets added here. Now what's happened is that they've cleaned up the rule where you have to finish the roster on your to be involved in a sign and trade. So if the New York had the rights to bird rights to John Smith, and John Smith went to Europe this past year and then came back, you couldn't use him in a sign and trade next year, right? Like, so we did this in Brooklyn with Keith Bogans. Like I call it the Keith Bogans rule. Keith made like $5 million because he was part of the Boston Brooklyn trade because we needed the money to make it work. So that's the beauty of, like, I always say to teams, and this is why, why New York was smart with this. When you have an open roster spot at the end of the year, sign guys. Sign them, because at least you have your non-bird rights. Like New York, like they would have, Brock's as smart as it is out there, he would have figured it out and stuff like that. But like the ability to add Shake Milton instead of Precious Achiuwa, that's a big thing. Or Alec Burks or one of these other guys here, sign guys, and at least you can maybe use them as a trade chip here and everything like that. And I think the beauty of, and I know everyone goes crazy about these rules and how hard they are and stuff. I think the beauty of it is, I think it makes us like you really have to think, right? Like you have to think about how these, and like, that's why when we started this about Sports Business Classroom and about putting out the CBA 101, that hopefully in a few weeks, like it explains, and we were using examples, like it just makes people, it's fun, like how these different rules work and how it impacts, and the apron and all these different things here, where like New York does the Bridges trade, and it's reported Bridges for Bojan on whatever, June 24th. And people go batshit crazy because they're hard capped at the first apron. And I almost felt like saying, and I couldn't say this publicly, you think Brock Aller is going to allow the Knicks to be hard capped at the first apron here? Like, there's more to it, right? Like, we can operate as is, right? Like, we can say, okay, they're $6 million below the first apron. This is their window because it's been reported, right? Like, there was nothing else being out there here. But I think how these rules are and how they're challenging here, I just think it makes you have to think outside the box if you're front office. I think you have to check a lot more boxes. I think if you're fans, and if this is what interests you, and if you're a fan of teams, like, learn how the rules work. You don't have to learn how it works for all 30 teams, but if you're a Knicks fan, learn how the apron rules work. Learn how, if you want to go out and use the 5.2 tax, why will now hard cap you at the second apron, right? Like all these different things. And as far as the inability to exceed things here. So yeah, I mean, I think the CBA is complicated, but I think the way we try to break it down is to make it less complicated and to make it like, you don't want it to, the commissioner said something. He's like, I think Howard Beck had asked him, or maybe even Fred, like, do you get worried that this is going to turn off fans? I don't think so. Like, I think, listen, the teams are still spending, you're still, we wrote about it. Team spent $1.9 billion 2 years ago in July and August, and now we're at $2.8 billion or $2.7 billion. Like, but they're doing it differently, right? We're doing it differently as far as the trade rules have expanded, the extension rules have expanded. Cleveland signing Jared Allen probably doesn't happen under the old CBA. Them going out and DeJounte Murray to New Orleans probably doesn't happen under the old CBA because of how these expanded rules have happened there. So. That's my CBA talk as far as why I like the CBA.
I was just going to say, part of why I love what I get to do with Knicks Film School is because there are so many more fans, I think, that yearn to want to know the ins and outs. They see it's kind of useless to just pitch fake trades that have zero chance of happening because it doesn't work.
I always told my editors, I've accustomed to, hey, listen, we work in the media business, and like, if I'm going to get all like fired up about trades that will never happen, but I did tell my editors before we got into the free agency, I said we have to start accustoming ourselves to these rules, though. Like, we have to think about, like, if we're going to pitch stuff, like the trades and that's why, like, whenever we do trades that we'd like to see as a group, like, everything comes through me. Like, everything comes through me. I'm going to see your trade that you want to do because we're not putting out there things that would never happen, like because of the apron rules and all these different things.
Next time you're on, you'll have to tell me what is the most batshit crazy trade that someone has pitched that came across your way, and you're like, here are the 18 reasons why this can't happen. Bobby, we've kept you for longer than we said. I appreciate the time so much. If you're a Knicks fan out there and you want this stuff made easy to understand and actually, for me at least, entertaining, obviously read everything Bobby writes, subscribe to ESPN Insider, and the second you put out that CBA 101, it's going right there on my bookmark tab up on my browser because I'm
in the process of putting a table of contents, which is a lot harder than actually writing the CBA 101. So that's like my...
it is going to be an invaluable resource. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, thinking ahead already to next summer, Sports Business Classroom in Vegas. If you think you could be in Vegas for, whatever it's, a couple days even, go do that. You will not regret it. Bobby, I can't thank you enough for the time. Appreciate you as always. These sessions are invaluable for me, really.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Knicks Film School Podcast. This episode was once again presented by BetUS.